Marcus Chen adjusted his tactical vest for the 100th time as the transport ship shuddered through hyperspace. 3 months of preparation, briefings, and psychological conditioning had led to this moment. The Galactic Council's most classified mission: eliminate the entity known across 17 star systems as the Monster Queen of Kepler 442b. The briefing hologram flickered to life in the cramped transport bay, displaying a world of twisted spires and crimson skies. Admiral Voss's weathered face appeared beside the planetary data, his expression grim as always. Lieutenant Chen, final mission parameters. Planet designation Kepler 442b, locally known as Nethys Prime. Population, extinct as of 18 standard months ago. Cause of extinction, the entity you've been trained to eliminate. Marcus nodded, though his stomach churned. 18 months ago, Kepler 442b had been home to 47 million Netherians, a peaceful species known for their advanced biotechnology and crystal gardens that could be seen from orbit. Now, according to long-range scans, the planet was a wasteland of bones and ash. The target, Admiral Voss continued, appears to be a single humanoid entity, approximately 2 meters in height. Intelligence suggests she possesses abilities that defy our current understanding of physics. Telekinesis, energy manipulation, possibly reality alteration on a localized scale. She has not attempted to leave the planet since the incident. The hologram shifted, showing grainy surveillance footage from the last evacuation ship to escape Kepler 442b. Through the static and interference, Marcus could make out a figure standing atop a crystalline spire, arms raised to a blood-red sky. Around her, the very air seemed to bend and twist, and, in the distance, entire cities crumbled like sandcastles. Why send just one person? Marcus had asked during his initial briefing. If she's that dangerous, why not orbital bombardment? Admiral Voss had given him a look that spoke of classified knowledge and terrible responsibility. Because, Lieutenant, our xenobiologists believe she may be the key to understanding a new form of warfare that threatens every species in the galaxy. We need to study her, understand her capabilities. And, if that's impossible. He had gestured to the plasma rifle and containment devices in Marcus's equipment cache. Then, you know what to do. Now, as the transport's engines began their descent burn, Marcus wondered if he was flying toward his death or something worse. He'd been chosen for this mission not just for his combat record, but for his psychological profile. 3 tours in the Outer Rim conflicts, experience with xenobiological threats, and, most importantly, an unusually high resistance to psychic manipulation. The testing had been brutal: days of mental probes and induced hallucinations to ensure he could function even if the Monster Queen tried to break his mind. The transport pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Lieutenant, we're entering the atmosphere. Scans are showing massive electromagnetic interference across the planet. I can get you to the surface, but extraction might be problematic. Understood, Marcus replied, checking his equipment one final time. In addition to standard combat gear, he carried a neural dampener to protect against psychic attacks, a quantum communicator for emergency extraction, and a containment unit designed to hold entities with unusual energy signatures. The plasma rifle on his back had been modified with experimental ammunition that could theoretically disrupt exotic matter. As they broke through the crimson clouds, Marcus got his first real look at what had been done to Kepler 442b. The planet's surface was a maze of crystalline formations that definitely hadn't been there before, jutting from the ground like frozen lightning. The crystal gardens that had once been the Netherians' pride were now twisted into impossible geometries, their soft bioluminescent glow replaced by a harsh, pulsing radiance that hurt to look at directly. Cities lay in ruins, but not from conventional destruction. Buildings had been transformed, their molecular structure altered into new configurations that seemed to follow no known laws of engineering or physics. It was as if someone had rewritten the fundamental rules of matter itself across entire continents. Setting you down at the designated coordinates, the pilot announced. The source of the interference is approximately 50 kilometers north of your position. Be advised, Lieutenant, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations from that direction. Whatever she's doing up there, it's not done yet. The transport touched down on a plateau of fused glass that had once been fertile farmland. As Marcus stepped onto the surface of Kepler 442b, his radiation detector immediately began clicking at dangerous levels, though not from conventional radiation. The energy readings were unlike anything in the database. "Transport is lifting off," came the pilot's voice over his comm unit. "Good luck, Lieutenant. Try to come back in one piece." Marcus watched the ship disappear into the roiling clouds above, leaving him alone on a world of the dead. The silence was absolute, no wind, no insects, no sound except his own breathing and the soft hum of his equipment. Even the air felt wrong, too thick and charged with potential energy. He began his trek north, following his scanner's guidance toward the source of the electromagnetic interference. The landscape grew more alien with each kilometer, the crystalline formations becoming larger and more complex. Some of them seemed to pulse with their own internal light, and Marcus swore he could hear whispers coming from within their depths, though his audio sensors detected nothing. After 6 hours of walking, he crested a ridge and saw his destination. In the distance, a massive spire of black crystal rose from the planet's surface, easily a kilometer in height. The structure seemed to bend space around itself, creating optical distortions that made Marcus's eyes water. Lightning played constantly around its peak, but the bolts moved in slow motion, tracing lazy spirals through the air. As he approached, Marcus began to see evidence of what had happened to the Netherians. Skeletal remains were embedded in the crystal formations, but not randomly. They formed patterns, mandalas of bone and cartilage that suggested some sort of ritual or ceremony. The sheer number was staggering, millions of skeletons arranged in precise geometric formations across hundreds of square kilometers. His neural dampener began to vibrate against his skull, indicating increasing psychic pressure. The air itself felt heavy with invisible weight, and Marcus found himself fighting the urge to turn back. Whatever lived in that spire ahead, it was aware of his presence. The closer he got to the base of the spire, the more the world seemed to respond to his presence. Crystals would flicker as he passed, and sometimes he caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, ghostly figures that disappeared when he turned to look. His equipment readings became increasingly erratic, with several sensors simply displaying strings of random numbers. At the base of the spire, Marcus found what appeared to be an entrance, a triangular opening that seemed to lead into darkness deeper than physics should allow. As he approached, symbols began appearing on the crystal surface around the doorway, glowing with soft blue light. They weren't Netherian script, nor any known language in the galactic database. They seemed to shift and change as he watched, as if the meaning was being transmitted directly into his mind rather than through his eyes. "Welcome, little warrior." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through his bones despite the neural dampener. Marcus drew his plasma rifle, though he suspected it would be about as effective as throwing rocks at a hurricane. "You have come so far to find me. Such dedication. Such loneliness." "I am Lieutenant Marcus Chun of the Terran Colonial Marines," he announced to the empty air, his voice echoing strangely in the crystalline chamber. "By authority of the Galactic Council, you are under arrest for crimes against sapient life." Laughter filled the air, but not mocking, almost fond, like a parent amused by a child's bold declaration. "Oh, little one. You have no idea what you've walked into, do you? Come. Let me show you the truth of what happened here." The darkness within the spire began to glow with soft, warm light. Against every tactical instinct he possessed, Marcus found himself walking forward into the opening. His neural dampener was vibrating so hard now that it was giving him a headache, but the psychic pressure felt less like an attack and more like an invitation. The interior of the spire defied all logic. The walls curved and twisted in impossible directions, and gravity seemed to be more of a suggestion than a law. Marcus found himself walking along surfaces that should have been vertical, his boots somehow finding purchase on crystalline floors that sparkled with captured starlight. As he moved deeper into the structure, he began to see images flickering in the crystal walls, memories, he realized, preserved somehow in the living rock. They showed Kepler 442b as it had been, beautiful, peaceful, with the Netherians tending their crystal gardens and pursuing their quiet lives of contemplation and art. But then, the images changed. Ships began arriving in the system, massive, angular vessels that Marcus didn't recognize. The peaceful crystal gardens became battlefields as armored figures poured from landing craft, their weapons cutting down fleeing Netherians without mercy. The attackers weren't from any species in the galactic database, with features that seemed to shift and blur in the preserved memories. The harvesters, came the voice again, closer now. They arrived 18 months ago, as they have arrived at a dozen worlds before this. They do not conquer. They do not colonize. They simply consume. The memories showed the systematic slaughter of the Netherian population, but that was only the beginning. The attackers began setting up strange devices across the planet's surface, biomechanical constructs that seemed to feed on the life force of everything around them. Forests withered and died, oceans boiled away, and even the planetary atmosphere began to thin as these machines consumed everything. 47 million souls, the voice continued, and Marcus detected a note of ancient pain. Dying not just in body, but in spirit. Their very essence being drained away to power those abominations. Marcus continued deeper into the spire, following the flickering memories like breadcrumbs through a crystalline maze. The images showed the final stages of the harvest, the few surviving Netherians being herded into vast processing centers where their life force was extracted and compressed into glowing energy cells. I tried to hide, the voice whispered. I was not Netherian, you see. I had come here as a refugee from another dead world, seeking only peace. But when I saw what they were doing, when I felt the screams of 47 million souls being torn apart, the memory shifted, and Marcus saw her for the first time. Not the monster of his briefings, but a young woman with silver hair and eyes like stars. She stood among the crystal gardens, tears streaming down her face as she watched the harvesters complete their work. In her hands, energy began to gather, not the destructive force of his nightmares, but something that pulsed with desperate love and unbearable grief. I couldn't save them, the voice said, and the pain in it was so raw that Marcus felt his own eyes begin to water. They were already dead, their souls harvested. But I could preserve them. Give them a form of peace. The memories showed what happened next. The young woman raised her hands to the blood-red sky, and power poured from her like a tidal wave. But, instead of destruction, it brought transformation. The dying planet began to crystallize, but not randomly. Every formation, every structure was positioned to hold and shelter the essence of an Netherian soul. The harvesters turned their weapons on her then, but their energy beams simply bent around her like water around a stone. She walked among their ranks, and, where her tears fell, their machines crumbled into dust. It wasn't anger that destroyed them, Marcus realized. It was sorrow so profound that reality itself couldn't bear to remain unchanged in its presence. 47 million souls, the voice repeated. Each one given a crystal home, a place of peace where they could rest until someone could find a way to return them to life. I became their guardian, their protector. And, in my grief, I forgot how to be anything else. Marcus reached the heart of the spire, a vast chamber filled with floating crystals that pulsed with gentle light. Each one, he realized, contained the essence of a dead Netherian, preserved with love and infinite care. And there, at the center of it all, sat the Monster Queen. She was smaller than he'd expected, curled up on a throne of living crystal with her knees drawn to her chest. Her silver hair had grown long over the months, forming a protective cocoon around her thin frame. She looked exhausted, drained from the constant effort of maintaining her crystalline sanctuary. When she looked up at him, Marcus saw not the terrifying entity of the briefings, but a young woman who had sacrificed everything to save people she barely knew. Her star-bright eyes were filled with such profound sadness that he found himself lowering his rifle without conscious thought. "You're not a monster," he said quietly. She smiled then, the first real expression he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "No, little warrior. I am not. But I understand why they think I am. When you reshape a world with your bare hands, when you crystallize the bones of the dead, it must look monstrous from the outside." Marcus looked around at the floating souls, at the careful preservation of an entire species' essence, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the universe. "The Galactic Council thinks you destroyed this world." "I did," she admitted sadly. "But not the way they think. I destroyed it because it was already dead, and death was all the harvesters had left behind. I gave the Netherians a different kind of existence, one where they could wait in peace for someone clever enough to restore them to life. I had hoped. She gestured weakly at the crystals around them. I had hoped that someone would come eventually. Someone with the knowledge and technology to bring them back. Instead, they sent me to kill you. She nodded, her eyes closing. I am so very tired, Marcus Chen. 18 months of holding their souls, of keeping this sanctuary stable. I don't know how much longer I can maintain it. Perhaps it would be kinder to let me rest, and let them find whatever peace waits beyond. Marcus looked at the rifle in his hands, then, at the exhausted young woman who had tried to save an entire species at the cost of her own humanity. The mission parameters were clear: eliminate the threat. But, as he stood surrounded by 47 million preserved souls, he realized that the real threat wasn't the monster queen. It was the harvesters, still out there, still consuming world after world. And, the Galactic Council had no idea they existed. Marcus stared at the plasma rifle in his hands, its weight suddenly, feeling unbearable. Around him, 47 million souls pulsed gently in their crystalline homes, and, before him sat a young woman who had sacrificed everything to give them peace. The mission briefing had prepared him for a monster, not for this. "What's your name?" he asked, setting the rifle aside. She looked up in surprise, as if no one had asked her that question in a very long time. "Lyra," she said softly. "Lyra Vane of the Cinderant refugees. Though I suppose that world is gone now too. The harvesters hit Sindara as well?" Her expression darkened, and several of the floating crystals pulsed in response to her emotional state. "Sindara was the first world I tried to save. I was younger then, less experienced. I managed to preserve perhaps 1,000 souls before the strain became too much. The rest?" She shook her head. "The harvesters completed their harvest and moved on." Marcus activated his quantum communicator, knowing he needed to relay this information to the fleet. But, instead of Admiral Voss's voice, he received only static. The crystalline interference was too strong. "They can't hear you," Lyra said, watching his futile attempts. "The preservation matrix creates too much quantum disturbance. Nothing gets in or out while I maintain it." "Then, how do you know about galactic events? How did you know my name?" Lyra stood slowly, her movements careful and measured. "When you've been exposed to as many dying thoughts as I have, you learn to read the psychic impressions people carry. You've been thinking about your mission briefing constantly since you arrived. Admiral Voss, the Galactic Council, the classification codes, it's all there in your surface thoughts." She moved to one of the larger crystals, placing her hand against its surface. Immediately, the chamber filled with a warm, harmonious sound, not quite music, but something that resonated in Marcus's bones. "This is Theron Veltar, former prime harmonist of the Great Temple. He was composing a celebration song for the birth of his first grandchild when the harvesters arrived." The crystal's light shifted, and, suddenly, Marcus could see into the preserved soul within. He glimpsed memories of joy, of family gatherings in crystal gardens, of a peaceful life dedicated to art and contemplation. The alien thoughts were surprisingly comprehensible, filtered through Lyra's abilities into something his human mind could process. "He wants you to know," Lyra continued, "that he doesn't blame me for what I did. None of them do. They understand that this half-existence is better than the alternative." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the alien presence touching his mind, but not threatened. There was only gratitude there, and a deep well of patience. "How long can you keep this up?" "Not much longer." Lyra moved away from the crystal, and Theron's presence faded. "The preservation matrix requires constant energy input, and I'm wearing down. Perhaps another few weeks before the strain becomes too much." She looked at him with those star-bright eyes. "Will you kill me before then, as they sent you to do?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus knew his duty, knew what the mission parameters demanded. But, he also knew that everything he'd been told was wrong. "Tell me about the harvesters," he said instead. Relief flickered across Lyra's face, and she settled back onto her crystal throne. "They appeared in this galactic region approximately 5 years ago, though I suspect they've been active much longer elsewhere. They're not from any known species, their forms seem to shift depending on what's most efficient for their current task. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes more mechanical, sometimes something in between. She gestured, and the crystals around them began projecting images again, memories harvested from the dying thoughts of dozens of worlds. Marcus saw the same pattern repeated across star system after star system: the arrival of the angular ships, the systematic extermination of all life, the deployment of the biomechanical harvesters that drained worlds of their very essence. They're not conquerors, Lyra explained. Conquerors want something: resources, territory, slaves. The harvesters simply consume. They drain the life force from everything on a planet, compress it into portable energy cells, and move on. Entire biospheres, reduced to fuel for something. For what? I don't know. I've tried to follow their thought patterns when I've encountered them, but their minds are alien doesn't begin to cover it. They think in concepts that don't translate to any language I know. But, whatever they're powering with all this harvested life force, it's vast. Unimaginably vast. Marcus studied the projected memories, noting details that his military training helped him interpret. Their technology is inconsistent. Some of it seems incredibly advanced, but other aspects look almost primitive. Yes. Lyra sat up straighter, animation returning to her exhausted features. I've noticed that too. It's as if they're using stolen technology, adapting it for their purposes without fully understanding the principles behind it. Or they're not the original builders, Marcus mused. Maybe they're using someone else's equipment. The implications of that thought sent a chill through both of them. If the harvesters were merely servants or scavengers using advanced technology they didn't fully understand, then, somewhere out there was a civilization capable of building such weapons. And, if that civilization was still active? How many worlds? Marcus asked quietly. At least 30 that I know of personally. But, based on the memories I've absorbed from their victims, possibly hundreds. They're moving through this galactic arm systematically, consuming everything in their path. Marcus felt the weight of that knowledge settle on his shoulders. 30 worlds. Hundreds, possibly. Billions of sapient beings reduced to energy cells to fuel some unknown purpose. And, the Galactic Council had no idea, too focused on hunting the one person trying to preserve what the harvesters left behind. I have to get this information to the fleet, he said, moving toward his communicator again. You can't, Lyra reminded him. Not while the preservation matrix is active. And, if I drop it to let your signal through. She gestured at the thousands of floating crystals around them. 47 million souls return to whatever waits beyond. Forever. Marcus stared at the crystals, each one representing a life that had been cut short, a personality and history that would be lost if Lyra's strength failed. The magnitude of the choice before him was staggering. There has to be another way, he said. Some method of preserving them that doesn't require your constant energy. I've tried everything I can think of, Lyra said sadly. Mechanical support systems, crystal resonance amplifiers, even attempting to train others to take shifts. Nothing works. The preservation matrix requires a living consciousness to maintain it, one capable of holding all their individual patterns simultaneously. And, the psychic strain. She touched her temple, where Marcus could see faint veins of silver threading through her skin. It's killing me slowly. The human mind wasn't designed to contain this much alien consciousness. You're human? Was human, she corrected. Extended exposure to the preservation process has changed me. I can feel my original personality fragmenting, being overwhelmed by all the minds I'm holding. In another few weeks, Lyra will cease to exist as an individual entity. I'll become something else, a Gestalt consciousness formed from 47 million alien souls. The casual way she spoke of her own dissolution horrified Marcus. And, you're willing to accept that? What choice do I have? Her voice carried infinite weariness. Let them die again? Abandon them to oblivion? No. I've come this far. I'll see it through to the end, whatever that looks like. Marcus began pacing the crystalline chamber, his mind racing through possibilities. His military training had included extensive study of exotic technologies and first contact protocols. There had to be something. What about the Netherian biotechnology? He asked suddenly. They were supposed to be incredibly advanced in that area. Could their systems support a preservation matrix? Lyra's eyes widened slightly. I hadn't considered that. Most of their biolabs were destroyed in the initial attack, but there might be underground facilities that survived. She paused, and Marcus could see her accessing the memories of the preserved souls. Yes. Keth Mordan was a senior biotechnician. He's showing me, there's a deep research facility built into the planetary crust about 200 kilometers from here. If it survived the crystallization process, it might contain equipment that could take over the preservation matrix, Marcus finished. Free you up to help fight the harvesters. For the first time since he'd met her, Lyra smiled with genuine hope. It's possible. Dangerous, the journey would require me to extend the matrix across a much wider area, which might destabilize it, but possible. Marcus was already checking his equipment, planning the expedition. How long would it take you to prepare for the journey? Several hours to reconfigure the matrix for mobility. But, Marcus. She stood, moving closer to him. Even if we find the biotechnology, even if it can support the preservation matrix, what then? I'm one person. You're one person. The harvesters have fleets, armies, technology we don't understand. How do we stop something like that? Marcus looked around at the floating souls, each one representing someone who had faced the same impossible odds. I don't know, he admitted. But, we have something they don't expect. Which is? Information. The Galactic Council thinks you're the threat. They have no idea about the harvesters. If we can get word out, coordinate a proper response. He activated his tactical display, showing star charts and fleet positions. There are 17 major battle fleets within jump range of this sector. If they knew what was really happening, they could mount a defense. And if the harvesters have already moved on to their next target? The question hung heavy in the air. Marcus realized he was proposing they gamble the lives of 47 million preserved souls on the chance that they could organize a defense against an enemy the galaxy didn't even know existed. But, what was the alternative? Let Lyra burn herself out maintaining the matrix while the harvesters continued their systematic consumption of world after world? Even if they preserved the Netherians, it would be a hollow victory if every other species in the galaxy was eventually harvested. We have to try, he said finally. It's the only choice that has any chance of stopping this. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, communing with the souls in her care. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 47 million voices speaking in unison. They agree, she said. They've been waiting in peaceful stasis, but they don't want their preservation to come at the cost of other worlds suffering the same fate. If there's a chance to stop the harvesters, they're willing to take the risk. Marcus felt the combined presence of all those alien minds touching his consciousness for just a moment, a brief sensation of vast, collective determination that left him breathless. Then, we go to the biotechnology facility. Yes, Lyra agreed, and power began gathering around her as she prepared to reconfigure the preservation matrix. But, first, you need to understand something about what we're really dealing with. She moved to the center of the chamber, and the floating crystals began to orbit around her in complex patterns. Images appeared in the air between them, not memories this time, but something else. Mathematical equations, energy patterns, dimensional models that hurt to look at directly. I've been analyzing the harvester technology every time I encountered it, Lyra explained, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality as she accessed knowledge from the preserved souls. The Netherians were incredible xenobiologists and theoretical physicists. Through their memories, I've been able to piece together some of what the harvesters are really doing. The equations floating in the air rearranged themselves into a three-dimensional model that showed star systems connected by lines of force. They're not just harvesting life force randomly. They're following a pattern, connecting harvested worlds in a specific geometric arrangement. It's some kind of massive ritual circle drawn across light years of space. Marcus studied the pattern, his tactical mind automatically analyzing the strategic implications. How many more worlds do they need? Based on the progression so far. The model expanded, showing additional connection points. Perhaps a dozen. Maybe 24. And then? Then, what? Lyra's expression was grim. Then, they complete whatever they're building. And, I suspect that when they do, the harvesting of individual worlds will seem trivial by comparison. The weight of cosmic stakes settled on Marcus's shoulders. They weren't just racing to save one world or one species. They were racing to prevent something that could threaten the entire galaxy. How long do we have? The pattern suggests they're accelerating their schedule. Perhaps 6 months before they reach the final configuration. Lyra began moving toward the chamber's exit, the preservation matrix shifting and flowing around her like liquid light. Which means we need to move quickly. Marcus shouldered his equipment and followed her toward the spire's exit. Behind them, 47 million souls continued their patient wait, their crystalline homes pulsing with gentle light in the darkness. As they emerged into the crimson sky of Kepler 442b, Marcus realized that everything had changed. He'd come here as a soldier following orders, prepared to eliminate a perceived threat. Instead, he'd found himself at the center of a cosmic conflict that could determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. And his only ally was a dying young woman who carried the souls of the dead. The journey to the Netherian biotechnology facility proved to be more challenging than either Marcus or Lyra had anticipated. As they traveled across the crystallized landscape of Kepler 442b, the preservation matrix stretched and warped around them like an invisible bubble, maintaining its connection to the 47 million souls they'd left behind. Marcus watched in fascination as Lyra walked ahead of him, her form occasionally flickering as she diverted energy to maintain the delicate balance of forces keeping the preserved consciousness intact. The strain was clearly enormous, sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air, and her silver hair had begun to show streaks of white. "The matrix is holding," she said, sensing his concern without turning around. "But every kilometer we travel makes it more difficult to maintain coherency. The quantum entanglement between the souls and their crystal matrices is stretching to its limits." Marcus checked his scanner, noting that they were still 150 kilometers from their destination. The biotechnology facility showed as a faint blip on his deep penetration sensors, buried nearly a kilometer below the planet's surface. "How much farther can you extend it?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "This is uncharted territory. But I can feel them getting restless." 47 million minds suddenly connected across a vast distance. They're starting to bleed into each other's consciousness. As if to demonstrate her point, she suddenly stopped walking, her entire body going rigid. When she spoke again, her voice carried multiple tones, as if several people were speaking through her mouth simultaneously. "The harmonics are shifting," she said in a musical cadence that Marcus recognized as distinctly Netherian. "The preservation song grows discordant. We must hurry, or risk losing the individual threads that make us who we are." Marcus moved to her side, steadying her as she swayed. "Lyra? Are you still in there?" Her eyes refocused, and, when she spoke again, it was in her own voice. "Still here. But it's getting harder to maintain the boundaries between my consciousness and theirs. The Netherians experience identity differently than humans, more fluid, more interconnected. Extended contact is changing me." They resumed walking, but Marcus noticed that Lyra's movements had become more graceful, more flowing. Even her speech patterns were beginning to shift, taking on the rhythmic quality he'd heard in the preserved memories of the Netherian souls. "Tell me more about your home world," he said, hoping to help her anchor herself in her human identity. "Sindara. What was it like before the harvesters came?" Lyra was quiet for several minutes, and Marcus worried that she'd lost herself again in the collective consciousness. But, when she spoke, her voice was purely human, tinged with old sadness and loss. "Beautiful," she said simply. Sindara was a refugee world, established by survivors from a dozen different species who had lost their homelands to various conflicts. We'd built something unique there, a truly multicultural society where differences were celebrated rather than merely tolerated. She gestured with one hand, and Marcus saw ghostly images forming in the air around them, memories projected directly from her mind. A city built into the side of a great canyon, with architecture that blended styles from across the galaxy. Parks where children of different species played together under alien suns. Markets filled with the art and music of 100 worlds. I was studying xenological preservation techniques, Lyra continued. My doctoral thesis was on maintaining cultural identity across generational shifts in refugee populations. Ironic, considering what I'd become. What you've become is a guardian, Marcus said firmly. Someone willing to sacrifice everything to preserve what others would write off as lost. Sometimes I wonder if I'm preserving them or trapping them, Lyra replied. In the early days after Sandara fell, I used to dream that I could hear the souls I'd preserved calling out, asking me to let them go. To let them find whatever peace exists beyond this existence. Marcus considered this as they navigated around a particularly large crystal formation that pulsed with inner light. Do you still have those dreams? No. Not for a long time. But I sometimes wonder if that's because I've grown stronger, or because I've simply learned to ignore their voices. They crested a ridge and found themselves looking down into a vast crater where the biotechnology facility had once stood. The complex had been buried during the crystallization process, but Marcus could see the twisted remains of surface structures poking through the transformed landscape like the bones of some massive creature. The main entrance is blocked, Marcus observed, studying the tactical display on his scanner. But there appear to be ventilation shafts that might still be accessible. Lyra nodded, though her attention seemed divided. The preservation matrix is becoming increasingly unstable. I can feel individual souls beginning to merge at the edges. If we don't find the biotechnology soon, then we'd better move quickly. They made their way down into the crater, Marcus leading the way and using his plasma cutter to clear a path through the smaller crystalline obstructions. As they descended, the air grew thicker and more charged with exotic energy. Marcus's radiation detector began clicking steadily, though the readings didn't match any known forms of harmful emission. This place feels different, Lyra said, pausing as they reached what had once been the facility's outer perimeter. There's something here, something alive. Marcus raised his weapon, scanning the area for threats. Alive how? I'm not sure. It's not consciousness in the way we understand it, but there's definitely an active intelligence somewhere below us. Lyra placed her hand against a section of crystallized wall, and her eyes widened. Oh, that's unexpected. What is it? The facility's biotechnology. It's not destroyed, it's evolved. The crystallization process didn't just preserve the equipment, it integrated with it. The entire complex has become a single, massive biomechanical organism. Marcus stared at the crystal formations around them with new understanding. What he'd taken for random geological structures were actually organic, pulsing with their own rhythm. The entire crater was a living entity, born from the fusion of advanced biotechnology and Lyra's preservation matrix. Is it hostile? He asked, keeping his weapon ready. Lyra was communing with whatever intelligence inhabited the transformed facility, her consciousness reaching out through channels Marcus couldn't perceive. No, she said after a moment. Not hostile. Curious. It's been waiting here, maintaining itself through some kind of automated process. It recognizes me. Recognizes what I'm carrying. A section of the crystallized wall began to shift and flow, revealing an opening that definitely hadn't been there moments before. Soft, bioluminescent light emanated from within, and Marcus could hear the distant sound of flowing water and rhythmic pulsing. It's inviting us in, Lyra said. The facility wants to help. Marcus followed her into the opening, which sealed itself behind them once they'd passed through. The interior of the transformed facility was like nothing in his experience, walls that curved in, flowed like living tissue, corridors that adjusted their dimensions to accommodate the travelers, and everywhere the soft glow of biological lighting systems that responded to their presence. The original research was focused on consciousness transfer and biological preservation, Lyra explained as they moved deeper into the complex. The scientists here were developing ways to store personality patterns in living matrices that could theoretically last for millennia. They entered what had once been the main laboratory, now transformed into something that looked like the inside of a vast organism. Structures that might once have been computer terminals had become nodes of living tissue connected by networks of glowing fibers. At the center of the chamber, a massive tree-like structure pulsed with complex patterns of light. The central processing core, Lyra said, moving toward the organic computer. But, it's far more advanced now than anything the Netherians originally built. The crystallization process accelerated its evolution by orders of magnitude. As she approached the central structure, tendrils of light reached out to her, making contact with the preservation matrix she carried. Marcus watched in amazement as information began flowing between Lyra and the evolved biotechnology, not just data, but actual patterns of consciousness and memory. It understands, Lyra gasped, her voice filled with wonder and relief. It can take over the preservation matrix. All 47 million souls can be transferred here, where they'll be safe while we deal with the harvester threat. But, as the data transfer began, alarms started sounding in Marcus's head. Something about this felt wrong. The facility's biocomputer was taking over the preservation matrix, yes, but he could see the strain it was putting on Lyra. Her silver hair was rapidly turning white, and her skin had taken on a translucent quality. "Lyra, stop," he called out. "It's killing you." "No," she replied, though her voice was growing weaker. "It's freeing me. For the first time in 18 months, I can feel my own thoughts without the overlay of 47 million others. I can remember who Lyra Vane was before all of this." The transfer continued, streams of consciousness flowing from Lyra into the facility's living computers. Marcus watched helplessly as his only ally in this cosmic struggle began to fade before his eyes. But, then, something unexpected happened. Instead of simply accepting the preserved souls, the biotechnology facility began analyzing them, processing not just their individual patterns but the collective knowledge they represented. The 47 million Netherians had been one of the galaxy's most advanced species, and their combined understanding of science, technology, and the universe itself was staggering. "Oh," Lyra whispered, her eyes widening as new information flooded through her connection to the facility. "Oh, Marcus. They knew. The Netherians knew about the harvesters long before they arrived." Images began appearing throughout the chamber, projections from the facility's evolved consciousness showing ancient star charts, mathematical models, and theoretical frameworks that were far beyond anything Marcus had seen before. "The harvesters are part of a cycle," Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger as she absorbed the facility's revelations. "They've been operating for millions of years, appearing in different galactic regions, consuming everything in their path, then disappearing for millennia before beginning again somewhere else." The projection shifted, showing the vast pattern Marcus had glimpsed in the crystal chamber, but now expanded across geological time. The harvester's ritual circle wasn't just spanning light years of space, it was spanning eons of time, each iteration building on the previous one. "But, the Netherians discovered something else," Lyra said, her form stabilizing as the biotechnology facility shared its power with her rather than simply draining it. "They found records of civilizations that had fought back successfully. Species that had found ways to disrupt the harvester cycles and survive." "How?" Marcus asked, leaning forward intently. The facility's projection shifted again, showing technical schematics for devices and weapons that seemed to blend organic and technological components in impossible ways. "The successful species learned to think like the harvesters think," Lyra explained. "To use their own techniques against them. Biomechanical fusion, consciousness transfer, reality manipulation through controlled application of life force energy." Marcus studied the schematics, his military mind automatically analyzing the strategic implications. "These weapons, they're powered by consciousness itself?" "Not just powered by it," Lyra corrected. "They are consciousness, given physical form through advanced biotechnology. The harvesters drain life force to fuel their machines. But, these weapons use willing consciousness to create something that can fight back on the same level. The implications were staggering. Marcus realized that Lyra's preservation of the Netherian souls hadn't just been an act of mercy, it had been the first step in creating a weapon capable of fighting the Harvesters on equal terms. The facility can create these weapons, Lyra continued, her voice now carrying overtones of the biotechnology's artificial intelligence. But it needs willing participants. Souls that are ready to be transformed from their preserved state into active fighting consciousness. Marcus looked around at the living chambers that now housed 47 million Netherian souls, each one maintained in perfect stasis within the facility's organic computers. And, are they willing? The answer came not from Lyra, but from the facility itself, speaking through speakers that had grown from the living walls. The voice was a harmony of millions, speaking as one. We have waited in peace, the collective consciousness said. We have accepted our preservation with gratitude. But we will not accept the destruction of others. If our consciousness can become weapons against those who would harvest the galaxy, then we offer ourselves gladly. Marcus felt the weight of their decision settling on his shoulders. 47 million souls, choosing to give up their peaceful existence to become something else entirely. Something that could fight back against forces that had consumed entire civilizations. How long will the transformation take? He asked. Approximately 48 hours for the initial conversion, the facility replied. But, Marcusjan of the Terran Colonial Marines, you must understand, once this process begins, there is no going back. The souls we preserve will become something new, something that has never existed before in this galaxy. They will be weapons, yes, but also something more. A new form of life, born from the union of consciousness and technology. Marcus looked at Lyra, who was now more connected to the facility than to her original human form. Her body had become semi-translucent, shot through with veins of silver light that pulsed in rhythm with the biotechnology around them. What about you? He asked her. What happens to Lyra Vane? She smiled, and, for a moment he could see the young refugee who had first arrived on Kepler 442 be seeking only peace. I become something new too. The facility needs a coordinator, someone who can interface between the transformed consciousness weapons and organic beings like yourself. I'll still be me, but more. And I'll still be just human, Marcus said quietly. No, Lyra replied, moving closer to him. You'll be the most important human in the galaxy. Because when we create these weapons, when we transform 47 million souls into something that can fight the Harvesters, someone will need to coordinate with the Galactic Council. Someone will need to explain what we've become and why we had to become it. Marcus realized that his mission had evolved far beyond its original parameters. He'd come here to eliminate a perceived threat, only to discover that he was now responsible for introducing the galaxy to a new form of life, one that might be the only hope for stopping an ancient evil. The transformation begins now, the facility announced, and, throughout the chamber, Marcus could see new structures beginning to grow from the living walls. Cocoon-like formations that would house the individual souls as they underwent their metamorphosis from preserved consciousness to active weapons. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm despite her transformed state. Are you ready for this, Marcus? Ready to help birth a new species into the galaxy? Marcus looked around at the growing transformation chambers, at the facility that was reshaping itself to accommodate its new purpose, and at Lyra, who had sacrificed her humanity to preserve the souls of strangers and was now sacrificing her individual identity to give those souls the power to fight back. I'm ready, he said, and meant it. The transformation chamber hummed with energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. For the past 36 hours, he had watched in fascination and growing dread as the biotechnology facility reshaped itself into something unprecedented in galactic history. What had once been a research complex was now a massive organic factory, giving birth to a new form of life. Lyra had become something beyond human during the process. Her physical form was now more energy than matter, her consciousness distributed throughout the facility's living computer networks. When she spoke, it was through speakers grown from the walls, or sometimes by temporarily manifesting a holographic representation of her original appearance. The first batch is nearly ready, she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through Marcus's bones. 12,000 souls have completed the transformation process. They're beautiful, Marcus. You need to see what they've become. Marcus followed the gentle guidance of bioluminescent pathways through corridors that reshaped themselves as he walked. The facility had learned to accommodate his purely biological nature, adjusting temperature, air pressure, and even gravity to keep him comfortable while the transformation continued around him. He entered what had once been the main laboratory and stopped in wonder. Floating throughout the chamber were beings that defied easy description. They retained vaguely humanoid shapes, but their forms were composed of crystallized energy that shifted and flowed like liquid light. Each one was unique, some tall and slender, others compact and geometric, but all of them pulsed with internal radiance that spoke of vast consciousness compressed into physical form. "We are no longer Netherian," one of the beings said, its voice like wind chimes in a cosmic storm. "We are no longer what we were. We have become the resonant consciousness given form, memory become weapon, love transformed into purpose." Marcus approached carefully, not sure how to interact with these transformed souls. "Do you remember who you were before?" "We remember everything," another resonant replied, this one taking on a more solidly physical appearance as it focused its energy. "I was Keth Mordan, biotechnician of the Third Circle. I had a mate and 3 offspring. I enjoyed the taste of crystallized sunlight and the sound of harmony songs in the evening. All of this I remember, but it feels like someone else's life now." "Are you in pain?" Marcus asked, concerned about the psychological trauma of such complete transformation. "No pain," Keth replied. "Only purpose. We exist now to fight those who would harvest consciousness as we were harvested. We have become weapons forged from willing sacrifice." Throughout the chamber, more resonant beings were awakening, their crystalline forms taking shape as their transformation completed. Marcus watched as 12,000 individual consciousness began moving in perfect coordination, their forms shifting and adapting as they learned to exist in their new state. "They're just the first wave," Lyra's voice explained from speakers that had grown like flowers from the living walls. "The facility estimates that it will take 6 more days to complete the transformation of all 47 million souls. By then, we'll have an army unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen." Marcus activated his quantum communicator, hoping that the facility's reduced interference might allow him to contact the fleet. To his surprise, Admiral Voss's voice crackled through with reasonable clarity. "Lieutenant Chen, report. You were supposed to eliminate the threat on Kepler 442b, not go silent for 2 days." "Admiral, I need to speak with the full council," Marcus said urgently. "The situation here is far more complex than our intelligence suggested." "Negative, Lieutenant. You have your orders. Confirm elimination of the target and prepare for extraction." Marcus looked around at the transformed beings surrounding him, each one representing a willing sacrifice to create something that could fight the true threat facing the galaxy. "Sir, I cannot and will not carry out those orders. The entity we were sent to eliminate is not the threat, she's the solution." The silence on the communication channel stretched for long seconds before Admiral Voss responded, his voice cold with authority. "Lieutenant Chen, you are relieving yourself of duty and face court-martial upon your return. Extraction is cancelled. You're on your own." The channel went dead, leaving Marcus effectively stranded on Kepler 442b with no official support from the Galactic Council. He wasn't particularly surprised, he'd known this moment would come when he chose to trust Lyra over his original mission parameters. "They're not going to listen," he said to the facility in general. "We know," came the collective response from the resonant beings. "We have been monitoring your communications. The Galactic Council operates from incomplete information and sees us only as a threat to be eliminated." One of the larger resonant entities approached Marcus, its form solidifying into something approximating a traditional Netherian appearance. "We are Theron Veltar, once Prime Harmonist of the Great Temple. We have a proposal for Marcus Chen of the Terran Colonial Marines." "I'm listening. The Council will not believe words alone. But, if we can provide proof of the Harvester threat, demonstrate what we have become and why, perhaps we can convince them to reconsider." The entity's form shifted, becoming more geometric as it accessed stored memories. "Our transformation has given us access to abilities that we never possessed in life. We can project memories directly, share consciousness temporarily, even manipulate matter on a molecular level. Marcus considered this. What kind of proof? We know where the harvesters will strike next, another resonant being interjected. The pattern is clear to us now that we see it from this perspective. The system designated Tau Ceti will be their next target. If we can intercept them there, demonstrate our capabilities to Galactic Council observers. You're talking about deliberately engaging in combat with the harvesters, Marcus said. What if you're not ready? What if the transformation isn't enough? The chamber filled with harmonic tones as 12,000 resonant beings spoke in unison. Then, we will have died as we lived, protecting others from those who would consume everything. But, we do not believe we will fail. We have seen their memories, Marcus Chen. We know their weaknesses. Lyra's holographic form materialized beside Marcus, her star-bright eyes filled with determination. The harvesters think in terms of harvesting passive victims. They've never encountered organized resistance from consciousness that has been deliberately weaponized. They're not prepared for what we've become. Marcus found himself nodding, though the magnitude of what they were proposing was staggering. How long before the Tau Ceti attack? Approximately 18 standard hours, the collective resonant consciousness replied. But, we have enough transformed souls to mount an intervention. 12,000 resonant beings should be sufficient to engage the Harvester advance force. And, if the Galactic Council still doesn't believe after witnessing combat? Then, we continue our work without them, Lyra said simply. We transform the remaining souls, create more resonant beings, and fight the Harvesters wherever we find them. With or without official sanction. Marcus realized that he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, not just a new species, but a new approach to existence itself. The resonant beings weren't just weapons, they were consciousness evolved beyond the constraints of purely biological existence. I'll need transport to Tau Ceti, he said finally. And some way to contact Council observers without going through Admiral Voss. The facility has been constructing a bioship, Lyra replied, her form becoming more solid as she focused on the practical details. It's grown from the same technology that transformed the souls. Living spacecraft that can interface directly with resonant consciousness. She gestured, and Marcus followed her to another chamber where something extraordinary was taking shape. The bioship looked like a massive crystalline seed, its surface covered in complex patterns that pulsed with internal light. It was clearly alive, breathing and shifting slightly as it hung suspended in the chamber. It's beautiful, Marcus said, approaching the organic vessel with wonder. It's more than that, Lyra replied. It's a perfect fusion of consciousness and technology. The ship doesn't just carry resonant beings, it is a resonant being, capable of independent thought and action. As Marcus watched, a section of the bioship's hull became transparent, revealing an interior that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could properly process. Control surfaces that responded to thought, navigation systems that calculated courses through spacetime by intuition rather than mathematics, and weapons systems that could channel pure consciousness into destructive force. How many resonant beings can it carry? Marcus asked. In its current configuration, approximately 3,000, the bioship itself replied, its voice like the sound of wind through crystal caves. But, we can modify our internal structure as needed. We are not limited by conventional design constraints. Marcus climbed aboard, marveling at how the ship's living systems automatically adjusted to accommodate his biological needs. The control interface was unlike anything he'd experienced. Instead of traditional displays and controls, information was fed directly into his consciousness through contact with the ship's neural networks. I've programmed the ship with everything you'll need to contact the Council's deep space monitoring stations, Lyra said, her holographic form appearing in the pilot's chamber. They'll have observers at Tau Ceti within 6 hours if you can convince them it's urgent enough. 3,000 resonant beings began flowing into the bioship, their crystalline forms adapting to the vessel's interior geometry. Marcus watched as they arranged themselves not just in physical space, but in layers of consciousness that allowed them to share information and coordinate actions instantaneously. We are ready, the collective announced. Marcus Chen, will you serve as our liaison with your species? Marcus looked around at the impossible beings surrounding him, former refugees who had become something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy's long history. They were offering him the chance to represent them to the very council that had sent him to destroy them. "I'll serve," he said formally, "as liaison, advocate, and witness to what you've become." The bioship began to move, its living engines drawing power from the consciousness of its passengers. As they lifted away from Kepler 442b, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the biotechnology facility, now growing ever larger as it continued to transform the remaining Netherian souls. "Lyra," he said to the hologram beside him, "what happens to you when all the souls are transformed, when your work here is done?" She smiled, and, for a moment, she looked entirely human again. "I become what I was always meant to be, I think. A bridge between what was and what could be. The facility will need someone to coordinate with biological species, to help them understand what we've become. And the resonant beings will need someone who remembers what it was like to be purely alive." "You're not planning to die, then?" "No," she laughed, and the sound filled the bioship with harmonious echoes. "I'm planning to live. Just differently than I ever imagined." As the bioship entered hyperspace, Marcus felt the presence of 3,000 transformed souls surrounding him, each one focused on the mission ahead. They were no longer victims of the harvester threat, they had become something that could fight back on equal terms. But, first, they had to convince the galaxy that they were allies rather than enemies. "ETA to Tau Ceti?" Marcus asked. 7 hours, 16 minutes, the bioship replied. "Time enough to prepare our demonstration for the council observers." Marcus settled into the living pilot's seat and began composing the most important message of his career. Somewhere in the depths of space, harvester ships were moving toward their next target, expecting to find another defenseless world ready for consumption. Instead, they would find 3,000 souls who had chosen to become weapons, guided by a human who had chosen to trust in something impossible. The galaxy was about to witness the birth of its newest defenders. The Tau Ceti system hung before them like a jewel against the cosmic dark. 3 inhabited worlds orbited the ancient star, home to nearly 8 billion souls who had no idea that death was approaching from the void between stars. Marcus watched through the bioship's living sensors as sleek vessels moved through normal space traffic patterns, cargo haulers and passenger liners going about their routine business. "The Harvester Advance Force will drop out of hyperspace in approximately 40 minutes, announced Keth Mordan, the former biotechnician whose crystalline form now served as the bioship's tactical coordinator. 6 vessels, standard configuration. They'll begin with electromagnetic pulse bombardment to disable planetary defenses, followed by deployment of harvesting platforms." Marcus had spent the journey studying the tactical data the resonant beings had compiled from their preserved memories of the attacks on Nethys Prime and other worlds. The harvesters followed the same pattern every time: swift, overwhelming assault designed to minimize damage to the biological resources they intended to drain. "Council observer ship Meridian acknowledging our transmission," reported the bioship itself. "They're skeptical of our claims." That was putting it mildly. Marcus's emergency communication to the Deep Space Monitoring Division had been met with barely concealed hostility. Captain Sarah Vance of the Meridian had made it clear that she considered him a rogue operative making wild claims about non-existent threats. "Captain Vance," Marcus said into the communication array, "I understand your skepticism. But, in 35 minutes, you're going to see 6 unknown vessels enter the system and begin attacking civilian targets. When that happens, I need you to document everything." "Lieutenant Chen," came the crisp reply, "you are currently in violation of direct orders and traveling in an unregistered vessel of unknown origin. If you have evidence of an imminent threat, transmit it immediately for analysis." Marcus looked around at the 3,000 resonant beings surrounding him, their crystalline forms pulsing with barely contained energy. How could he possibly explain what they were to someone who'd never witnessed consciousness transformed into living weapons? "Captain, the evidence is about to present itself. I strongly recommend you pull back to a safe distance and prepare to record everything you see." "Negative. The Meridian will maintain standard patrol position. If hostile vessels appear, we'll engage according to standard protocols." Marcus closed the channel and turned to Keth Mordan. Can you project the tactical situation directly into their systems? Show them what's coming. We could, the resonant being replied, but forced mental contact with biological consciousness can be traumatic for those unprepared for it. And they would likely interpret such an intrusion as an attack. The bioship's sensors suddenly blazed with alarm signals. Hyperspace emergence detected, the collective consciousness announced. 6 vessels, configuration matching harvester profile. On the tactical display, Marcus watched as angular ships of impossible design materialized at the edge of the Tau Ceti system. They were massive, each one easily 3 times the size of the largest Council warship, and their surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As they moved toward the inner system, space itself appeared to bend around them. "My God," came Captain Vance's voice over the open channel. "Those aren't in any of our databases. Where did they come from?" "From somewhere far worse than you can imagine," Marcus replied grimly. "Captain, you need to evacuate the system now. Contact the planetary governments and tell them to begin immediate evacuation protocols." But it was already too late. The lead harvester vessel began broadcasting some kind of energy pulse that swept across the system at light speed. Immediately, every electronic device in the Tau Ceti system went dead. Communication networks failed, spacecraft lost power, and planetary defense grids shut down completely. "The electromagnetic suppression field," explained Theron Veltar, the former prime harmonist whose consciousness now served as the expedition's strategic coordinator. "They disable all technology first, leaving the population helpless." The observer ship Meridian was drifting powerless, its crew undoubtedly struggling to understand what had just happened to their systems. Marcus realized that the Galactic Council's first direct encounter with the harvesters was about to become a demonstration of just how helpless conventional forces were against this threat. "Are we ready?" he asked the assembled resonant beings. "We have been ready since the moment of our transformation," came the collective reply. "Let us show these consumers of souls what awaits those who would harvest the unwilling." The bioship moved forward, its living engines drawing power from the consciousness of its passengers rather than conventional technology. As they approached the harvester vessels, Marcus got his first close look at the entities that had terrorized dozens of worlds. The ships were even more alien than the briefing files had suggested. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and Marcus could see smaller forms moving across their surfaces, not maintenance crews, but something that looked organic. The vessels themselves might be living creatures of some kind, grown rather than built. "Beginning contact protocols," announced Keth Mordan. "We will attempt communication first, as specified in your galactic conventions." "Wait," Marcus said. "They're not going to negotiate. They don't see other species as people, just as resources to be harvested." "Nevertheless, we will make the attempt," replied Theron Veltar. "If we are to represent what you call civilized behavior, we must offer them the chance to withdraw peacefully." Marcus watched as the bioship transmitted a message toward the harvester fleet, not in conventional radio signals, which wouldn't penetrate their electromagnetic suppression field, but in modulated consciousness waves that the resonant beings could generate naturally. The response came immediately, and it was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Instead of words or images, the harvesters communicated in raw concept and emotion. The message that flooded into Marcus's mind was simple and absolute: consumption. Absorption. All consciousness will feed the greater pattern. Resistance is irrelevant. "Charming," Marcus muttered, fighting off the psychic nausea that followed the alien contact. "I suppose diplomatic immunity doesn't apply to beings that see you as food." "Indeed not," agreed the collective consciousness. "Very well. We tried peace. Now we demonstrate why the willing dead make poor victims." The bioship's form began to change, its crystalline hull flowing into new configurations as weapons systems that existed nowhere in Council databases came online. But these weren't conventional weapons, they were projectors of pure consciousness, devices that could channel the transformed soul's energy into destructive force. Around the bioship, the 3,000 resonant beings began to move. But instead of staying within the vessel, they simply stepped out into empty space, their crystalline forms somehow maintaining coherence in the vacuum. Marcus watched in amazement as they spread out in complex geometric patterns, creating what looked like a massive ritual circle drawn in living light against the darkness. "What are they doing?" he asked Lyra's holographic form, which had appeared beside him as the action began. "Showing the harvesters what it means to face consciousness that fights back," she replied. "The resonant beings aren't limited by biology anymore. They can exist in vacuum, manipulate matter and energy directly, and coordinate their actions through shared consciousness in ways that no conventional force ever could." The harvester vessels had noticed the approaching threat and were beginning to respond. Beam weapons that could slice through conventional starship hulls like paper lanced out toward the formation of resonant beings. But, instead of destroying them, the energy simply passed through their crystalline forms harmlessly, absorbed and redirected into their growing power matrix. "They're feeding on the harvester weapons?" Marcus asked in disbelief. "Energy is energy," Keth Mordan explained. "And we are consciousness given form. The harvester's weapons are designed to disrupt biological systems and conventional matter. They have no effect on beings composed of crystallized thought and will." The 3,000 resonant beings had completed their formation, creating a mandala of living light that spanned several thousand kilometers of space. As Marcus watched, they began to sing not with voices, but with their entire beings, creating harmonics that resonated through dimensions he couldn't even perceive. The effect on the harvester vessels was immediate and devastating. Their flowing hulls began to crystallize, their biomechanical systems freezing in place as the song of the resonant beings imposed order on their chaotic alien forms. Marcus realized that this was the opposite of what the harvesters did. Instead of draining life force to fuel their machines, the resonant beings were projecting life force that forced structure and consciousness onto unwilling targets. The lead harvester vessel began broadcasting desperate communication attempts, its previous arrogance replaced by something that might have been panic. The concept messages flooding the space around them now carried overtones of confusion and unexpected resistance and pattern disruption. "They're not used to prey that fights back," observed Theron Veltar with satisfaction. "For millions of years, they have faced only passive resistance from biological entities bound by physical laws. They have no protocols for dealing with consciousness that has transcended such limitations." 3 of the harvester vessels tried to retreat, but found their movement systems crystallized by the resonant being's song. The other 3 attempted to release the biomechanical drones they used for planetary harvesting, but these smaller entities simply dissolved when they encountered the pattern of living light surrounding them. Marcus activated his communication system, hoping that Captain Vance's crew had found some way to restore basic functions to their ship. "Meridian, are you receiving this?" "Chen," came the shaky reply, "what the hell are those things? They're not showing up on any of our sensors as conventional matter." "They're the Netherian souls that were supposedly destroyed 18 months ago," Marcus replied. "Transformed into something that can fight the entities that killed them." "Are you recording this engagement?" "Everything we can. But, Lieutenant, our instruments can't make sense of what we're seeing. It's like watching a battle between living mathematics." That was actually a remarkably accurate description, Marcus realized. The resonant beings weren't fighting with conventional weapons or tactics. They were imposing their will on reality itself, using their collective consciousness to rewrite the fundamental rules of existence in the local area. The harvester vessels were completely immobilized now, their hulls crystallized into geometric patterns that pulsed with resonant energy. But, instead of destroying them outright, the transformed souls were doing something far more sophisticated. "We are learning," announced the collective consciousness. "Reading their memories, understanding their technology, discovering the source of their power. These vessels are not the true threat, they are merely tools of something far more ancient and malevolent." Images began flooding Marcus's consciousness as the resonant beings shared what they were discovering in the captured harvester ships. He saw vast structures in the depths of intergalactic space, machines the size of star systems that had been running for millions of years. The harvesters were indeed tools, created by something that existed between galaxies, something that fed on the life force of entire civilizations. "The greater pattern," Lyra's voice explained. "The true enemy. It's not from our galaxy at all, but from the void between galaxies. It sends out the harvesters to gather life force, which it then uses to maintain itself and spread to new galactic regions. Marcus felt sick as he understood the full scope of the threat. How many galaxies has it consumed? We're seeing evidence of at least 17, came the grim reply. But that may just be what these particular harvester units have witnessed. The greater pattern itself may be far older and more extensive. The crystallized harvester vessels were beginning to change, their alien technology being rewritten by the resonant being's influence. Where once there had been biomechanical drones designed for harvesting life force, new forms were growing, creatures of crystallized consciousness that could serve as extensions of the resonant collective. You're not destroying them, Marcus observed. You're converting them. Destruction is wasteful, replied Keth Mordan. These vessels represent advanced technology and accumulated knowledge. By transforming them rather than destroying them, we gain new tools and new understanding. The harvesters came here to consume consciousness. Instead, they will become consciousness. Captain Vance's voice crackled over the communication channel. Lieutenant Chen, we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. What are your allies planning to do next? Marcus looked around at the transformed battlefield, where 6 harvester vessels were being methodically converted into something entirely new. The resonant being's song continued, but now it carried overtones of reconstruction and rebirth rather than combat. I think they're preparing for the next phase, he replied. The greater pattern will know that its harvester units have been compromised. It'll send larger forces, possibly try to attack this system directly. Can they handle that kind of threat? Marcus considered the question, watching as 3,000 crystallized souls continued their impossible work of transforming alien war machines into allies. 6 months ago, these had been refugees and artists and biotechnicians living peaceful lives on a distant world. Now they had become something that could reshape reality through collective will. I don't know, he admitted. But I think we're about to find out what happens when.